A few weeks ago, I had the house to myself. My family was on vacation, leaving me with a rare opportunity for complete solitude. The house sits farther back from the street than most around it, and the layout is unusual. The front porch opens directly into the living room, and the sidewalk from the street runs right alongside it. The living room is dominated by large windows that stretch nearly from floor to ceiling. They don't open, but they let in an incredible amount of light, making the space feel bright and airy during the day. At night, though, the effect is reversed. The same windows that provide daylight leave you completely exposed, the interior laid bare to anyone passing by. I usually didn't think much about it because no one ever seemed to come down our street late at night, and with the family gone, I was confident I had the place entirely to myself. I had decided earlier that evening to drink a little more than usual. It was a small indulgence in my own privacy, a rare chance to unwind without judgment. Around 9, I passed out on the couch in the living room, sprawled beneath the largest set of windows. I remember feeling safe, the soft cushions holding me in a lazy embrace, the dim glow of the lamp at the end of the room the only light left on. I fell into a deep, heavy sleep, one of those that feels total and unbroken. I woke suddenly, not knowing why. The sudden awareness of my surroundings hit me like a jolt. My body shook with chills, and I felt a disorientation that wasn't typical, as if something was off but I couldn't name it. The first thing I noticed was a sound, low and distant at first, that gradually became sharper, more deliberate. There was a banging above me, on the window directly over the couch. My head lifted automatically, eyes wide. Outside, I saw a figure, vaguely outlined against the darkness, pounding on the glass with a force that made the entire pane rattle. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. My pulse thumped hard in my ears as I tried to convince myself that it was impossible, that someone couldn't be there. The clock on the cable box across the room confirmed it was 3 in the morning. The banging continued in regular, impatient bursts. It was relentless, methodical, terrifying. My body was frozen, rooted to the couch. I didn't even think about calling the police yet. My brain was struggling to process the impossibility of the situation. Then, without warning, the banging stopped. The silence that replaced it was almost worse, thick and heavy, pressing down on me in the darkness. I didn't dare move, even to reach for my phone. Just when I thought it was over, the sound returned, more insistent than before. This time it wasn't just the window. There was pounding at the front door, loud, heavy knocks that seemed to echo through the empty house. My stomach turned, a deep, icy dread settling into every nerve. The combination of sounds, so close and so precise, made my mind race through every possible scenario, every possible way someone could be inside or just outside waiting. The front yard is small but open. My house's position, set back from the road, makes it almost impossible to see anyone approaching from the street without being at the porch. Whoever was out there had to have been deliberate, purposeful. The banging continued for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of alternating and overlapping noise, the sound of hands striking glass and wood in a rhythm that felt almost personal, like they were challenging me, testing me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't make a sound. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my body refused to cooperate. My mind cycled through disbelief, terror, and a desperate attempt to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was teenagers, a prank. Maybe it was someone drunk wandering the streets. Maybe someone had noticed I was alone. None of it mattered in the moment. I couldn't escape the raw fear that gripped me. Eventually, the banging stopped. Silence returned, this time final. My body remained tense, frozen even after the absence of sound. Every nerve ending was alert, every shadow suspect. I stayed on the couch until dawn, unmoving, too afraid to check the windows, too afraid to even step into the hall leading to my bedroom. When the light finally began to seep through the blinds, I felt safe enough to move, but the residual panic lingered like a physical weight on my shoulders. I called a friend later that morning, attempting to explain what had happened and asking if he could come over for the week while my family was away. He didn't hesitate to respond with disbelief and sarcasm, but even his mocking words couldn't erase the fear that had taken root in me. In the following days, I inspected every entry point to the house. Windows, doors, locks, even the back patio. Nothing seemed tampered with. There were no footprints outside, no signs of forced entry, no disturbance in the yard. I couldn't understand how someone could have banged with such force and intention, and then vanished without a trace. I considered cameras, but the house isn't wired for them, and the thought of installing them in the immediate aftermath felt invasive and helpless at the same time. I spent the next few weeks with an almost constant sense of being watched. Any creak, any distant sound outside, set my nerves on edge. I rarely stayed up alone in the living room after that, preferring the smaller, more enclosed bedrooms where I felt at least partially protected. The experience had left a mark that went beyond the immediate terror of the event. It was the realization of vulnerability, the recognition that someone could approach your home undetected and exert control over you simply through sound and presence. Eventually, my family returned. I didn't share the full story at first, simply because it sounded insane when spoken aloud. When I did, their reaction was a mix of concern and mild disbelief, which only made me feel more isolated. I never discovered who or what had caused that night's terror, and part of me suspects I never will. The house remains the same, unchanged, yet nothing about it feels safe anymore. The living room, once bright and open, now feels like a stage, every shadow a potential threat, every window a reminder of what could happen when you are truly alone. I installed cameras after that night, not because I expected them to catch anything, but because the act of doing so gave me a small measure of control over a situation that had left me feeling powerless. The footage never revealed anything unusual, never showed anyone approaching. It didn't matter. The experience itself was enough to alter how I interacted with the space. I stopped leaving the lights off, stopped spending hours on the couch in solitude, and started locking doors earlier in the evening. Looking back, I understand the fear wasn't irrational. I had been completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and someone or something had taken advantage of that. Whether it was a person or a group or just chance doesn't matter. What matters is the memory, the way my mind fixated on the banging, the sound echoing in the dark, the impossibility of escape. It was a clear lesson in awareness and caution, one I carry with me even now. The living room windows no longer feel like a feature, they feel like a warning. The house, once a sanctuary, now holds the weight of that night. A memory of fear so precise it remains almost physical. A reminder that even in a familiar space, safety can be an illusion. When I was 7, my 2 older brothers and I found ourselves in a patch of dirt that had been used for motocross, though it was abandoned and overgrown enough that nobody really cared about it anymore. We spent hours exploring that space, climbing over ruts and piles of dirt, and chasing each other around, imagining ourselves as adventurers discovering some hidden world. For reasons I don't fully understand even now, we decided to dig a tunnel. The plan wasn't sophisticated. We just wanted to see how far we could get, and in our minds, the tunnel became a secret passage only we knew about. We grabbed sticks, old boards, and whatever we could use to scrape and scoop dirt, and we started working at it with the kind of energy only children have when the sun is still high and the day is ours. The tunnel slowly took shape, 6 feet in and only about 2 feet high, enough that we had to crouch and sometimes lie on our sides to continue digging. The dirt was loose in some places, compact in others, and every scoop made a small cloud that filled our noses and mouths, leaving a fine layer of brown dust on our skin and clothes. I remember the smell of earth and sweat mixing in the warm air, the warmth coming not just from the sun, but from the friction of our hands against the dirt, the heat of our little bodies pushing against the ground. It was exhausting but thrilling. We felt like builders, like explorers who had finally discovered something worth claiming. I was the one at the very front, at the face of the tunnel, brushing aside dirt, feeling the walls shift around me as the older boys worked just behind. And then it collapsed. The first moment was almost surreal. There was a crack, a faint rumble, and then suddenly everything was gone. My world vanished into pure darkness, a solid, suffocating wall of earth pressing against every part of me. The heat hit me instantly, a furnace-like pressure that made it impossible to think clearly at first. My chest was pinned by the weight of the soil above. My arms pressed so tightly against my body that I couldn't even move them to claw at the dirt near my face. My hands, just inches from the soil I desperately wanted to push away, were useless. The more I tried to move, the more the dirt seemed to crush into me. My stomach contracted with each panicked breath, my lungs struggling to fill, and the dust made me cough, which made everything tighten even further. It was terrifying, not just because I was buried, but because the darkness itself seemed to have a presence. It was hot, it was tight, it was unbearable. My vision, if I can even call it, that in total blackness, started to flare red. I suppose it was my blood rushing to my head, or maybe the way my mind tried to make sense of the heat and pressure. It looked like fire in my eyes. My chest heaved, My body fought against the soil with every ounce of strength I didn't know I had, and I felt the edges of panic creeping into pure, unfiltered terror. My heart was racing, every beat echoing in the claustrophobic blackness, a rhythm that seemed both too fast and too slow at the same time. Time lost all meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into an eternity. I remember imagining I was trapped somewhere I didn't belong, imagining the ground above me swallowing me whole. The world I had known just hours ago, the sun, the wind, the sound of my brother's voices, vanished. All that existed was heat, pressure, dust, and the horrible realization that I could not breathe. I inhaled a mouthful of dirt by accident, my lungs spasmed, and I coughed violently, but the more I coughed, the more restricted my chest became. I was no longer just panicking. I was fighting for the most basic human instinct, trying to fill my lungs with air while the earth held me prisoner. I remember thinking about how wrong this was, how little I understood about the soil I had been so curious about. My body, so small and so weak, was no match for it. My mind started to imagine everything at once. The panic, the suffocation, the heat, the darkness, all of it blending together until I couldn't separate my thoughts from the sensations anymore. I was convinced I had been buried alive, that I would never get out, that this was the end. And then something grabbed my foot. The sudden tug was jarring, more shocking than any feeling I had experienced in the tunnel. I wanted to scream, but there was no room, no way to make a sound. I felt a second, firmer grip, pulling me upward. My brothers had been digging frantically, swinging their hands and whatever tools they could find to clear the collapse, and they had reached me. Slowly, painfully, piece by piece, dirt was cleared. The weight on my chest lessened. I felt the soil slide off my arms and legs, the grip on my body finally loosening enough that I could stretch and move again. When I finally emerged, gasping and shaking, the sunlight was blinding. Every sense was overloaded. My lungs burned from dirt and panic, my skin felt raw from the weight and heat, and my eyes took several moments to adjust from the pitch-black enclosure to the open world. My brothers' faces were smeared with dirt, sweat streaked through the dust on their skin, but they were there. They had saved me. Relief washed over me in a way I couldn't articulate at that age. The world felt different. Everything felt larger, brighter, and somehow more fragile. We never told our parents. Going home felt normal, though nothing was normal inside me. I got hosed down in the backyard, the cold water shocking my skin and washing away the worst of the dirt, but not the memory. Even years later, I could feel that weight pressing down, that fire in the darkness, the absolute helplessness. It was a memory burned into me, not violent in itself, but shaping the way I understood fear and fragility. The day ended with no words, just quiet relief. My brothers and I went back to normal play, but the tunnel was never touched again. That patch of dirt, the ruts, and the abandoned motocross track became something to pass by, not to conquer. I learned the limit of my curiosity and the price of underestimating forces I didn't understand. I also learned something about human connection and instinct. My brothers didn't hesitate, didn't stop. They acted with a clarity that cut through the panic like a blade. They pulled me out because they could, because they had to, because nothing else mattered at that moment. Even now, the memory is vivid. I can feel the heat, the crushing soil, the red darkness. I can hear the silence of the world underground, a silence so complete it left nothing to cling to but fear. But I also feel the tug at my foot, the strength of my brothers, the shift from total helplessness to movement, to freedom, to air again. The contrast is what I remember most, the darkness and the light, the weight and the lift, the terror and the relief. That moment, buried in dirt as a 7-year-old, stayed with me not because it was dramatic or life-threatening in a cinematic sense, but because it was total, overwhelming, and utterly real. We never spoke of it again. There were no stories told, no warnings shared, no lectures given. I went home, got cleaned up, and life moved forward as if it had never happened. But for me, it did. Every time I walk past loose earth or see a mound of dirt, the memory surfaces, instant, tangible, impossible to ignore. And I know, without question, that I survived not because of anything I did, but because 2 people younger than my fears and older than my strength refused to let me be lost in the earth. It's not a story of ghosts or monsters, just soil and heat and panic. But it is a story that is mine, real in every sense, and I carry it like a shadow that taught me how quickly the world can close in and how quickly it can open up again. A few summers ago, I decided to go for a late-night bike ride with a friend. We hadn't done anything particularly adventurous, just riding around the quiet streets, the kind of empty roads where the only light comes from street lamps that flicker or hum. The air was warm, sticky in that way it can get when the sun finally goes down, but the ground hasn't cooled yet. We laughed about nothing and everything at the same time, spinning through familiar neighborhoods, our tires making that soft scrape against the asphalt. By the end of the night, we parted ways at a small intersection, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back to my house alone. The streets were empty, completely dead. Usually that's peaceful, but there's a tension in it too, the kind you only notice at night when it feels like the world has shrunk down to the small patch of road you're on. My path home cut through a stretch under construction, where the sidewalk was the only passable surface. I slipped onto it, pedaling carefully around the uneven slabs and piles of orange barricades. For a minute, everything felt normal, the quiet broken only by the occasional far-off hum of a car on a main road or a dog barking somewhere behind a fence. Then I saw him. He was walking in the opposite direction, a man in his 40s, scruffy but not homeless, wearing a plain shirt and dark shorts. He didn't look threatening at first, just ordinary, maybe tired or distracted. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to squeeze past him too closely, so I hung back, letting a few feet of space open between us. After a moment, I said something like, "Hey, behind you," just to make him aware I was there. He turned around slowly, and the look he gave me stopped me cold. It wasn't confusion or surprise. It was pure, intense anger, like a wall of heat pressed directly into me. His eyes were sharp, too aware, and his posture was rigid. I forced myself to pedal past, telling myself it was probably just an overreaction, that it didn't mean anything. I made my turn onto my street, thinking I'd be home in a minute. That's when he started following me. At first, it was the sound of footsteps behind me, echoing off the concrete, irregular but deliberate. Then came the yelling. He was screaming things that made my stomach tighten, words I'll never forget, words aimed to scare, to provoke. He called me a cunt, said he was going to kill me, and I could hear the intensity in his voice, the way he punctuated every word like it was a statement of fact rather than a threat. My heart jumped, my hands gripped the handlebars tight, and I forced myself to ride faster. I live right off the corner, and the thought of him realizing where I lived made my stomach twist. I couldn't just go home, couldn't let him know. I made a decision to loop around the block, trying to put distance between us, to figure out a way to get inside without him seeing where I lived. The ride was tense, every shadow seemed to stretch in his direction, every streetlight flicker a warning. I kept checking behind me, and I could see him keeping pace, always just far enough to be seen, but close enough to make me nervous. The worst part came when I looped back around. My chest was tight, my legs shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. I turned to see my street, the familiar quiet corner that should have felt safe, and froze. There he was, standing on my front stoop. Just standing there, not moving, not shouting, just watching the street like he knew exactly what he was looking for. I could see the silhouette of his figure in the dim porch light, his posture calm but deliberate. The feeling of violation hit me instantly. He had seen me ride by again, had followed me, had waited, and now he was on my property. The way he stood there, like he had some claim to the space, made me realize how wrong everything was, how real the danger felt. I didn't stop. I didn't acknowledge him. I kept riding past, looping back toward the area where my friend lived, heart hammering, mind racing with every possible outcome. I didn't want to draw attention or provoke him further. I reached my friend's house, gasping, hands shaking, and explained in clipped sentences what had happened. The sense of relief was small, just knowing I was out of immediate reach, but the tension didn't leave. Even then, I could feel the residual panic, the creeping thought that he could come back at any moment. In the following days, I couldn't shake it. Every creak outside my window, every shadow moving past the porch, every unfamiliar person on the street triggered a memory of that night. I stayed on edge, careful with when I left the house, who I passed, and how I navigated the streets. The paranoia wasn't constant, but it lingered, a low-level awareness that nothing about that night was normal. 2 days later, my bike, the same one I had been riding that night, was gone. Stolen from the alleyway next to my house. The same alley he could have easily walked past if he had been waiting. I called my mom, told her what happened, and she insisted we contact the police. They came, took notes, asked questions, but there wasn't much to go on. No one had seen anything unusual, no cameras caught him, and the bike was never recovered. Thinking back, the scarier part wasn't the yelling or the chasing. It wasn't even the anger in his eyes. It was the way he knew where I lived, the way he waited without moving, perfectly still watching. The way someone could be ordinary, blend into the night, and suddenly turn familiar spaces into threatening ones. The realization that normal streets, normal alleys, normal houses don't guarantee safety. It's that knowledge that stayed with me. I never saw him again, but I never felt quite the same riding alone at night. Even now, years later, I double-check corners. I notice shadows differently. I carry a quiet tension in areas that used to feel mundane. The night taught me something simple and frightening. You can think you're safe, and then one ordinary person can prove you're not. When I was 14, my grandparents moved into separate bedrooms on the first floor of their house, and I was moved into a room directly beneath the long, narrow bedroom upstairs that had always unsettled me. I had no reason for it, not really. I'd been uneasy about the upstairs since I was a kid. The layout, the way the light fell through the windows, the creak of the old floorboards, all of it made me nervous. There was one room in particular I refused to enter alone. I had been told, when I was younger, that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see something like a gorilla come out of the closets at night, move around the room, and disappear back inside. I never gave it much thought as a child, mostly laughed it off, but I never went in there. Now, lying on my bed below it, I realized I couldn't ignore the upstairs anymore. The first night it happened, I was awake, staring at the ceiling. Every light in the house was off, the quiet thick enough to feel tangible. Then it began. Thump, thump, thump. I froze immediately. The sound came from one side of the upstairs room and moved across the length of it, steady and unhurried. The steps were deliberate, casual, exactly what I would expect from someone walking alone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might echo up into the floorboards. The sound stopped at the far side of the room, directly above me, and then silence returned. I didn't move for a long time, not daring to speak or breathe too loudly. When the steps resumed, this time starting from the other side of the room, I recognized the pattern immediately. They passed over me again, moving carefully, deliberately, until they stopped at the door. I didn't want to look up. My instincts screamed that I was already too exposed. Then I heard it, footsteps on the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the slow rhythm of someone descending. Silence. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence again as the sound reached the first floor. I felt frozen in the bed, the distant glow of the dining room light spilling across the floor and cutting shadows into strange shapes. I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the pounding of my pulse. The next sound made my stomach drop. Scratching, low and deliberate, coming from my grandpa's gun case in the corner of the room. I could pinpoint it exactly, the wood under assault by some steady, intentional motion. The case was a dark, polished wood with brass fittings, and the scratches rang against it, sliding down the surface with a metallic rasp. The door of the case thumped softly against its frame each time a scratch began, a rhythmic, almost mocking accompaniment. I tried to scream, but found I couldn't. My mouth opened, my throat worked, but no sound came out. After a long, terrified moment, I forced myself to inhale deeply and finally let out a loud scream that filled the room. Within seconds, my grandfather was there, moving quickly, and I felt the tight knot of fear in my chest loosen just a little. Even then, I didn't sleep normally. I draped a sheet along the side of the bed, buried myself in a comforter, and turned my back to the door. I put on headphones to blur the sounds of the house and pressed my face into the pillow, trying to convince myself that nothing else could reach me. I couldn't allow my imagination to wander. The next morning, my grandfather mentioned what had happened to my grandmother. She shrugged, said something about a cousin having heard footsteps before, as if it were a trivial nuisance. I didn't argue. I simply resolved to stay on top of the bed, under the covers, facing away from the door, headphones on. I've stayed at that house countless times since. The footsteps always come, always the same slow, deliberate pacing across the floor above me. I've never seen anyone, never caught sight of a shadow, never had a clear explanation. The creaking of the floor, the settling of the house, it all fits perfectly with what I hear. Sometimes I think about going upstairs, walking the length of that room just to see. But I can't. I never have, and I don't plan to. I've learned to live with it. I don't let my imagination run wild. I stay as grounded as I can, following the same routine each night. Headphones on, facing away from the door, tucked under blankets. I keep a small flashlight near the bed and a bottle of water, the light and warmth providing a little sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. The room below the narrow bedroom remains mine during visits, but the sense of unease is constant. What strikes me most is how precise it is. The steps always begin at the same points, the pacing never changes. The scratches on the gun case that first night were deliberate, exact. Even in a house as old as theirs, with settling floors and shifting walls, there's a rhythm here that doesn't belong to anything natural. I've tried leaving lights on, playing white noise, running the air conditioning to mask the sounds. None of it changes the pattern. I hear it anyway. I've considered the possibility that the house has simply shifted, the structure responding to temperature, humidity, or age, creating sounds that mimic movement. That seems plausible, rational, and yet it doesn't explain the scratches on the case, or the clarity with which I hear each step. When the sound came down the stairs that first night, it was undeniably in the same rhythm I had just experienced above me. The dining room light should have made me feel safe, but it didn't. Over the years, I've noticed other patterns. The sounds never occur in the middle of the day. Always late at night, often after I've gone to bed. They seem deliberate, though I can't prove it. There's a consistency that makes them feel purposeful, as if the house itself or some element within it is rehearsing a private routine I'm not supposed to witness. I've accepted that I'll never have an answer. I can't explain why I'm drawn to write this now, sitting in my apartment miles away, recalling the sensation of those steps above me. The dread, the helplessness, the certainty that someone, or something, was pacing deliberately just beyond my reach. It's not fear of ghosts or monsters, it's fear of being observed, of an inevitability I cannot intervene in. It's the awareness that the house has a rhythm that I do not control. That room upstairs, the long narrow space with closets on either side, the bed in the center, the window at the far end, remains a mystery, and the sound of footsteps on its floorboards is a sound that has marked my life every time I visit. I still go to my grandparents' house. I sleep on the bed, under the covers, facing away from the door, headphones on. The first night after that initial experience, I tried hiding under the bed for safety. Now I stay on top, aware that hiding won't make it stop. I've accepted that it's a part of the environment, part of the house itself. I tell myself it's just the house settling, the old wood contracting, the floors shifting. The sound exists, the fear exists, and I've learned to coexist with both. No one else in the family seems to notice it, or if they do, they don't mention it. My grandparents, practical and kind, dismiss it as house noises, though my grandfather did offer the light that first night to give me comfort. That's all I've needed since, small measures of control in an uncontrollable setting. I have never felt the footsteps come down the stairs again, but I remain vigilant every night, aware that they could at any moment. I know the rhythm now. I can tell which side of the room they start on, when they'll pass above me, when they'll pause at the far end. I've learned to stay still and let it pass, to focus on my breathing, to ground myself in the physical sensations of the bed beneath me, the blankets around me, the faint glow of a hallway light filtering in. I've stopped trying to rationalize beyond that. The house has its patterns. I follow mine. I've spent years sleeping this way during visits, never straying from the ritual I've built. I remain on top of the bed, wrapped in blankets, facing away from the door, headphones on. The footsteps continue, and I continue to lie still, grounded, aware. I don't need to understand why it happens, or what causes it. I only need to survive the night. Every visit ends the same. I wake up, untouched, alive, but with the echo of the steps lingering in my mind, reminding me that the house has its own life, its own rhythm, and I am just a part of it while I am there. I was walking to my bus stop just before sunrise, the street still shrouded in mist, the kind that makes every streetlight look like it's glowing through water. It was around 5 in the morning, the kind of early where your body feels caught between sleep and wakefulness, and your mind is occupied with small, meaningless choices. I was eating a banana, debating whether I wanted my Starbucks before or after the commute, when I reached the corner that cut into a dark alley. Normally I would have passed by without a second thought, the city still quiet except for the distant hum of an early delivery truck, but that morning the air felt heavier. It wasn't fear yet, just a subtle unease I couldn't place. Then a man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, wearing a black mask, his presence sudden and startling in the dim light. My first instinct was confusion, almost disbelief. Sleep still clung to my movements, making them slow and measured. Then he shouted. The words didn't register at first. They were sharp, commanding, the kind that jolts you fully awake. I felt a gun press against my temple, cold metal against skin, and in that instant everything clarified. This wasn't an accidental encounter. This was dangerous. I obeyed. I put my bags down where he told me, tried to keep my movements deliberate and slow. I told him out loud what I was doing, trying to show compliance, and somehow my voice betrayed my panic. I kept talking even as my heart raced, my hands still sticky from the banana, telling him I was putting my stuff down, that it was all right there, hoping that explanation would satisfy him. It didn't. The gun pressed harder, his frustration evident even without seeing his face. Every second stretched, my body locked in place, the weight of his attention pressing down like gravity. The alley was narrow, littered with old papers, bits of broken glass, a forgotten soda can flattened into the dirt. The mist clung to it, making it look like a scene from a movie, but there was no glamour, no romanticism. Just dirt, shadows, and a gun aimed at my head. I remember noticing that despite the danger, my outfit disguised me. Baggy pants, a loose jacket, a hat pulled low, my features hidden, my identity unclear except for my voice. And maybe that's what shifted him. In that moment, I could tell he realized I was a woman. He paused, stood up, and pointed down the alley, gesturing for me to follow. I froze. My stomach turned, a mix of adrenaline and fear twisting together. I knew the neighborhood had been hit by a recent rash of sexual assaults, reports all over the news. The thought of following him down that alley made my throat close, my legs tremble. But there was no obvious escape at that moment, no one around, no place to hide. My mind raced, trying to weigh logic against instinct. One part of me whispered compliance, survival. Another part, the one that had been through years of practice, of learning how to talk my way through tense situations, screamed that there was no way I was going down there. I spoke. I called out that I was coming, that I would follow, trying to convince him of my compliance while inching backward toward the sidewalk. The balance of fear and opportunity was delicate. He believed me, or at least hesitated, and that gave me the window I needed. I tucked my head, lowered my shoulders, and ran. My legs moved faster than I thought they could, feet pounding against the wet concrete, heart hammering like it would burst through my chest. I heard a scream behind me, my own voice, high and sharp, cutting through the mist. I didn't stop until several blocks later, long after the alley, and the man had disappeared from sight. The city was waking up, distant lights flickering on, cars beginning to stir, but I barely noticed. I ducked into the shadows of my apartment building, heart still racing, lungs burning, trying to catch my breath and convince myself that I was safe. I watched the street from the doorway, half expecting him to appear at any moment, but he didn't. The streets remained empty, only the faint hum of early morning traffic in the distance. By the time the police arrived to check the alley an hour later, the man was long gone. There was no trace beyond the banana peel I had dropped, browning in the damp, the only evidence of what had just occurred. I walked the perimeter of the area, looking for anything out of place, but there was nothing. The realization hit me slowly, the mix of relief and lingering shock that comes after surviving a near encounter. I had escaped unharmed, but the scene of the alley, the weight of the gun, the sense of having my life decided by a stranger's whim, those images stayed. They pressed against the inside of my eyelids every time I closed my eyes for days afterward. In the aftermath, the event replayed in my mind over and over, dissected in detail. Every second, every choice, every minor shift in movement mattered. I could still feel the cold metal, still hear the sharpness in his voice. The mist clinging to the street, the smell of wet concrete, the slight stickiness of the banana on my fingers, all of it embedded in memory like a photograph burned into my mind. Even now, years later, it surfaces at odd moments. I think about the what-ifs, the scenarios that might have unfolded differently. I think about the randomness of survival, the small slivers of opportunity that made the difference between life and something far worse. That morning changed me, not in a way that made me paranoid or fearful at every turn, but in a way that sharpened my perception. It taught me how quickly ordinary routines can be disrupted, how fragile the illusion of safety can be. The streets I once walked without thought became a little more vivid in memory, a little more detailed. Shadows held weight. Mist carried a sense of possibility. Every early morning, the taste of a banana, the feel of a bag in my hand, carries a whisper of that moment. I'm fortunate, because the encounter didn't escalate further. There was no physical harm, no further pursuit. I got home, I lived, I went to work later that day as if nothing had happened. And yet, the alley, the man, the gun, all of it lingers. I carry it in a way that's not obvious, not visible to anyone else. A reminder of fragility, of the arbitrary nature of danger, and of the clarity that sometimes comes in the moments when instinct takes over. What stays with me most is the surrealness of the experience. The ordinary act of walking to the bus, eating a banana, the trivial thought about coffee, against the extraordinary danger that appeared without warning. The juxtaposition of mundane routine and sudden violence etched itself deep into memory. It wasn't cinematic, it wasn't stylized. It was sharp, real, and unforgettable. And while it haunts me, it also reminds me that even in the most ordinary moments, resilience can surface. That the choice to act, to run, to survive can appear in a split second. That the moments we often overlook, early mornings, quiet streets, the small decisions of routine, can be where our instincts and courage are truly tested. I still think about it sometimes, not with fear as much as with a sober acknowledgement. The alley exists in memory, the man exists in memory, but I exist too, walking away, running, surviving. And in that, there is closure, however imperfect. I learned that day that survival isn't always about confrontation or heroics. Sometimes it's about calculation, timing, and listening to the sharpest voice inside you. That voice saved me, and I carry it with me now, every day, quiet but unyielding. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods near my hometown, taking one of the less traveled paths I had found over time. It wasn't far from the road, but it felt completely secluded. The trees were close together, and the ground was littered with fallen branches and leaves that had started to rot. The smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation was normal for the time of year, but then something else hit me. It was sharp and cloying, a kind of sweet chemical smell that didn't belong in the forest. It wasn't floral or natural. It made me pause and look around, trying to find its source. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed aside some undergrowth, leaves and brambles snagging at my jacket. That's when I saw him. The body was half hidden beneath ferns and dead leaves. My stomach sank immediately. He had clearly been there for a while. His skin was a strange combination of green and black, bloated in places, and some of it had ruptured, leaving dark, wet patches. Insects and small animals had been feeding, and the surrounding leaves were crushed and smeared. I felt a wave of nausea, but I stayed frozen looking at him. I didn't touch anything. I had no idea what to do, but my phone had signal. I called the police and explained what I had found. They told me to stay with the body until they arrived. The woods were almost empty at that point in the day, and the sun was starting to drop behind the thick trees. Shadows stretched long and cold across the forest floor. I didn't move far from the body, but I tried to make myself as far back as I could without leaving his side. I couldn't leave, and I couldn't think about going back the way I had come. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The forest around me became a different place as the light faded. The sweet smell seemed stronger now, or maybe I had just become accustomed to noticing it. The sounds of the woods were heightened. Leaves rustled under unseen feet. Small animals squeaked in the underbrush. The wind rattled dead branches. The body sat there in its stillness, and I felt an intense, helpless responsibility. I was supposed to watch him, to guard something I didn't understand, waiting for people who seemed like they might never come. Eventually, I heard the distant rumble of a vehicle. Headlights cut through the trees, and then officers were there. They moved with efficiency I hadn't expected, taking control immediately. They set up tape and asked me questions. They explained that he had committed suicide, that he had hanged himself from a tree, and then fallen when the branch broke. Everything I had seen, the state of the body, made sense in that context, and yet it didn't make it any easier to process. The officers did their job while I stayed near the edge of the scene, trying to keep my stomach from heaving and my mind from retreating completely into panic. After they had taken photographs, made notes, and prepared the body for removal, I was allowed to leave. Walking back through the woods, the normal sounds of birds and wind felt empty. The forest that had been familiar and comforting to me now felt hostile, heavy with the memory of what I had seen. I tried to tell myself it was over, that it was just a human tragedy I had witnessed, but the image of him stayed with me. That night, and for many nights after, he came back in my dreams. At first, it was just fragments. I could feel him in the room, sitting somewhere out of sight, or I would see him lying where I had found him, his skin the wrong colors and shapes. Then it became more vivid. In the dreams, he spoke. It wasn't a friendly voice. There was anger, bitterness, a sense that I had violated some boundary. He wanted me to hurt myself, to pay for disturbing him, and the words were clear and insistent. I would wake up in the middle of the night, shaking, heart racing, unable to shake the sensation that he was still there in some way watching. I don't think he was supernatural. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits. I think my brain was trying to make sense of what I had seen. It was trauma, pure and simple. My mind had attached a personality to the horror, and it replayed it in ways that made me relive the event. The dreams were my own mind processing, but that didn't make them any easier to bear. Some nights I couldn't sleep at all. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and every small sound in my apartment felt like movement in the woods. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see him again, swollen and green, the sweet chemical smell almost tangible in the darkness of my mind. I started walking in the woods less. When I did go, I stayed on marked trails in daylight with other people. The forest felt different, heavy with memory. The smells that had once been comforting, the earth, the leaves, the pine, now carried a reminder of that day. I avoided paths that wound off into less traveled areas. I told myself that it was rational, that I was just protecting myself, but it was more than that. It was fear that even now I couldn't name. Over time, the dreams became less frequent, though they never stopped completely. Every now and then, a fragment of the man would appear. Sometimes I would dream about finding him again, or I would see him in a crowd, standing somewhere I shouldn't be, watching me. It was always disturbing, always personal. I never told anyone about the dreams, not in detail. I didn't want to seem irrational, and I knew rationally that it was my own mind responding to trauma, but that didn't make the fear or the nausea any less real. I learned eventually to accept it. I accept that I can't erase the memory, that I can't undo what I saw or how it made me feel. I accept that he will probably show up in my dreams from time to time, that I will remember the shape of his body, the smell that was so strong it seemed to fill the forest, the way the shadows pressed against me as night fell. Accepting it doesn't make it pleasant, but it does make it manageable. Now, years later, I still walk in the woods sometimes. I stay on the paths in daylight with friends. The woods feel like themselves again, mostly. But every so often, when the wind shifts or when a particular tree falls in a certain way, I remember the day I found him. I remember waiting in the dark for help, the smell that hit me before I even saw him, the sense of responsibility that pressed down on me so heavily. I remember the dreams and the anger that my mind had given him, and I understand that what I felt then and what I feel now is part of living with that memory. It isn't supernatural, it isn't cursed, it isn't beyond understanding. It is the aftermath of encountering death in a place that feels alive and empty at the same time. It is the weight of human reality pressing down when you are alone with it, and the only thing you can do is keep walking, keep remembering, and keep living. When I was in high school, I spent a lot of time at my friend's house next door to a property that had been for sale longer than I could remember. It was an old craftsman built in the 1950s, with faded paint and a small, neatly kept yard that gave nothing away about the chaos that seemed to follow it. People would move in for a few months, sometimes half a year, and then leave in the middle of the night without a word. The house was always quiet, but there was a sense of lingering tension in the air, like it had absorbed something from every family that had lived there before. My friend and I, bored on a long December evening with nothing to do, decided to explore it. I don't know why it seemed fun at the time. Maybe it was the novelty of sneaking into a house that everyone else seemed to avoid, or maybe it was just a dare between us, a test of courage for two teenagers with nothing better to do. We went around the back, where there was a small dog door at the edge of the kitchen. He wriggled through and unlocked the main door from the inside for me. The house smelled like old wood and dust, a faint metallic tang in the air, almost like iron, though I couldn't say from what. The floor creaked under my shoes, a hollow sound that carried through the empty rooms. The walls were painted a muted beige, wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners, and the kitchen had a built-in breakfast nook set against a large picture window that looked out onto the street. Streetlights filtered in, casting long, thin rectangles of pale yellow across the room, and shadows gathered in the corners, making the room feel both larger and smaller at the same time. We sat on the floor across from the breakfast nook, leaning against the cabinets and talking quietly, just passing the time. It was the kind of silence that is only comfortable with someone you know well. The house was dark, the electricity turned off, so every sound was amplified. The low hum of a heater from somewhere else, the faint ticking of a clock that didn't really keep time, the scrape of our jeans against the linoleum floor. I had my back to the window, so the light fell on my friend's face in a soft, uneven glow, and I remember noticing the small details. The way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the way his hands rested on his knees. And then he screamed. It wasn't a shout that carried a warning. It was a sharp, jagged sound of pure panic, and in that instant, everything went black. I don't mean the room got dark, I mean my vision went completely. I couldn't see the floor, the walls, the streetlight outside. I couldn't even see the blackness itself. My whole body was engulfed in a cold that was physical, not imagined, a deep, invasive cold that started at my scalp and moved downward like ice creeping under my skin. It was almost sticky, pressing against me from every side, and it made my limbs feel heavy, like I was wading through water that had the density of freezing syrup. I tried to scream, but my voice sounded hollow and distant, like it came from someone else. Then I felt his hand, cold, but alive, gripping mine and pulling me with a force that made it impossible to resist. We moved fast, though I had no sense of direction, and the blackness clung to me, slowing everything down, filling my lungs with its weight. Slowly, as we emerged into the night, the chill started to fade, and my vision returned. We were outside, under the streetlight, standing in the snow-covered yard. The cold air was real, biting at my face, but it was nothing compared to what I had just felt inside the house. My legs trembled uncontrollably, and I had to take a few deep breaths just to get them under control. I looked at my friend and saw it in his expression too. The wide eyes, the tense jaw, the hands still shaking slightly. It was clear that he had seen something, or at least experienced something, that had rattled him as much as it had me. My mind raced, trying to understand what had happened in the house, trying to grasp how a few moments could have made the room feel so different, so oppressive, so impossibly cold. Finally, he told me. He said that as we had been talking, a figure had emerged from under the table. He described it as black, featureless, with only a vague shape of a girl, crawling out and sitting on top of me. My body, he said, had reacted without control, groping blindly, my eyes wide open but seeing nothing. I don't know if he saw it clearly or if it was a reaction to my movements, but the terror in his voice as he explained it made my skin crawl all over again. He had pulled me out, literally dragged me from the house, without even thinking. I had been unconscious to everything except the sensation of cold and that impossible blackness pressing against me, and I hadn't even known what had hit me until I was back in the open air. The days afterward were strange. I felt like I was moving through the world under a thin veil of unease, my senses sharper and more anxious than usual. Every time I walked past that house, my stomach twisted, my skin prickled. I could still feel that cold, pressing, sticky weight in the back of my mind, and I realized that it had left a mark that wasn't just physical. I never went inside that house again. My friend and I still talk about it sometimes, as if revisiting the memory will make it less potent, but it doesn't. The story never changes. The details remain precise in my memory, the way the shadows pooled under the table, the texture of the floor, the sound of my friend's scream, the sensation of being pulled into the night. Even now, when I think about that night, the fear comes back almost instantly, a visceral, knotting sensation that tightens my chest and makes my hands sweat. I still shiver, even in a warm room, remembering the way the blackness felt as it covered me. I understand now that the fear wasn't of a ghost or a monster, but of something very real. The sudden, incomprehensible loss of control over your own body and senses, the sensation of being completely at the mercy of an unknown force. It was the absolute opposite of safety, and it was in a place that should have been mundane, normal, familiar. I can't explain exactly what it was or why it happened. I've tried to rationalize it countless times. Maybe it was some trick of the shadows. Maybe my brain had played a neurological trick in response to stress. Maybe a combination of both. But the memory is too real, too detailed, too tactile to dismiss. I remember every shiver, every thrum of my heartbeat, every second that stretched into infinity under that table. I haven't been inside that neighborhood at night since. Even now, I avoid walking alone past that street. I have nightmares that aren't quite dreams, where the blackness returns, pressing me down, and I wake with the same cold, heavy feeling that I did that night. But even with all of that, I can't deny the truth. It happened. It was there, it was real to me, and it changed the way I think about empty spaces, about darkness, about silence. That house, the floorboards, the table, the shadows, they remain fixed in my memory, a permanent reminder that some moments aren't just frightening in retrospect. They are frightening in every possible way, right in the middle of the ordinary world. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion late at night. The drive was supposed to take around 2 hours, and I hadn't stayed over because I had to be back at work the next morning. Most of the route cut through areas with dense trees and thick brush on either side, the kind of woods you see in movies that make you uneasy even during the day. By the time I'd been driving about 45 minutes, I hit a wave of exhaustion that came out of nowhere. It was that kind of sudden bone-deep fatigue where your eyelids feel like they weigh 100 pounds, and your brain just wants to shut down. I tried to push through, but it was impossible. I kept scanning for anywhere I could safely pull over and rest, but the roads were narrow and winding, and I didn't trust any of the small pull-offs I passed. Every driveway was gated, every parking area empty and exposed. There wasn't a single place I felt I could close my eyes and not be vulnerable. Eventually, I realized I had no choice. I slid onto the shoulder, far enough to clear the lane, but still behind a clump of bushes thick enough to obscure the car from the road. I kept my foot on the brake, left the engine running for the heat, and noted the time, 11:22, before I gave in to sleep. The world faded almost immediately. I woke suddenly to a scratching sound. It was soft, almost hesitant, like something was running its claws along the metal or glass of my car. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound had stopped by the time I had registered it. My body was so exhausted that I ignored it, convinced it was an animal or a branch brushing the car, and I drifted back to sleep. It woke me again, this time with a persistence that made my heart pick up. 12:40. The scratching was deliberate and constant. My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe a raccoon, a fox, or some other animal had found my car and was investigating. But the way the sound returned nearly an hour after the first time made no sense. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. I grabbed the rearview mirror and caught a fleeting glimpse of movement darting back into the tree line. I couldn't see clearly, and instinct told me to stay put. But the thought of staying in the car any longer was unbearable. I eased back onto the road, keeping my speed low, scanning every shadow, every curve. Up ahead, a bend less than 100 yards away revealed a car parked off to the side. The driver's door hung open, and the interior light cut a pale rectangle into the darkness. I slowed instinctively to look, half expecting to see someone inside, but the seat was empty. Then, behind me in the rearview mirror, I saw it, movement I couldn't immediately identify. My stomach turned. Before I could process, a man came sprinting around the corner from the side road, moving with a speed and intensity that froze me for a moment. His face was lit intermittently by passing headlights, twisted into an expression I've never forgotten, shouting and waving, but I couldn't make out the words clearly. His voice was hoarse, almost panicked, but there was a sharp authority to it, a force that made it clear he was demanding I leave immediately. I floored the accelerator and pulled back onto the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The road narrowed, trees pressing close on either side, the headlights slicing through the darkness. I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting him to appear in pursuit, but he vanished. The sound of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional whisper of leaves brushing the car was all I had as I sped down the winding path. My pulse was hammering, and my chest felt tight. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to stretch and twist. Every rustle of branches made my stomach drop. I kept driving until the dense forest finally thinned, and the familiar shapes of houses and streetlights appeared. It wasn't until I turned onto a well-lit main road that I allowed myself to exhale. Even then, my mind was replaying every detail. The scratching, the glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror, the empty car at the bend, the man's sudden appearance. I went over it again and again. I had no reason to stop for sleep on a road like that again. Not after knowing someone, or something, was close enough to intervene so quickly, so deliberately. The whole thing felt calculated, like he had been watching the road, knowing someone would pull over eventually, knowing exactly when to appear. The next day, I kept trying to rationalize what had happened. There's no proof of anything, no report, no witnesses. I had no idea who the man was, what he wanted, or why he was so insistent. He didn't follow me once I left the wooded stretch. He didn't do anything except appear at the right time to scare me away. I have no reason to assume he meant harm, but the intensity of it, the raw urgency, left me shaken in a way that lasts even now. I've driven that route a few times since, always during the day, always alert. Every time I see that bend where the other car was parked, I feel a jolt of unease. I can't explain why someone would wait in the woods for a stranger to pull over late at night, but the lesson I learned is simple and enduring. No matter how exhausted you are, no matter how impossible it feels to keep going, you don't stop on a dark, empty road. The risk isn't just about animals or branches or accidents. There are people out there, hidden, waiting, and when exhaustion clouds your judgment, it puts you directly in the wrong place at the wrong time. That night, I drove straight home without another stop. The moment I pulled into my driveway, I left the car running until the engine warmed completely, just to make sure I could gather myself. I sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet house, replaying every detail, trying to understand what I had seen. I never found out who that man was, never saw him again, and I've never slept in a car on the side of a road since. The memory is vivid, precise, and completely grounded in reality. It didn't involve anything supernatural, nothing unexplainable beyond human behavior, but it was enough to make me reconsider how vulnerable you are when you're tired, isolated, and in the wrong place at the wrong time. I still drive that route occasionally. I keep the map app open, I note every rest stop, every gas station, every stretch of road where the lights might come on. I don't let myself fall asleep in the car, and I certainly don't pull off behind a bush anymore. That one night, that one moment of weakness, is a reminder that danger doesn't have to be fantastical to be real. And sometimes the safest course of action is simply to keep moving until you can reach a place where you are clearly visible and secure. The memory is as sharp now as it was the night it happened, and I think it always will be. I was 17 and had just gotten my driver's license, which meant that for the first time I had a measure of independence that felt enormous. For months, my friends and I had been obsessed with finding abandoned places to explore, mostly for the thrill of sneaking around, but also because we had started joking about throwing small parties in them. Most of the houses we found were small, run down, or in obvious neighborhoods where anyone could see you pull up. But there was one that always caught my attention on my way home from my part-time job. It was massive and unfinished, sitting back from the road with a long driveway that disappeared behind thick trees. The walls were there, but the roof wasn't complete, and weeds had grown unchecked around the property. From the street, it looked like it had been abandoned for years, but there was something about it that seemed alive in a way I couldn't explain. One evening, I decided to show it to one of my friends. We had plans to see a movie later, so I figured we could swing by for a few minutes without it taking up our night. The sun was low, almost set, and the air had that heavy summer warmth that sticks to your skin. I remember driving with my headlights on, because dusk was already beginning to blur the edges of everything around us. As we pulled onto the long dirt driveway, the tires crunched over gravel and scattered small stones. The front of the house came into view, more impressive and eerie than I remembered. It sat like a hollow shell, giant empty windows staring out at us, and the unfinished nature of it made it look like it had been frozen mid-construction. We stopped for barely 10 seconds, just enough for my friend to lean forward and take in the scale of it before I put the car back in reverse. I didn't want to linger too long, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to get on to the movie and didn't want anyone to mistake us for vandals. As we headed back to the main road, I caught the gleam of headlights behind us. At first, I thought it was another car driving past, but it stayed right behind us, too close for comfort. My friend noticed it too, but we both shrugged it off, telling ourselves it was probably just someone heading home. The closer we got to the light at the intersection, the more I realized that the vehicle behind us was not letting up. It was a large truck, its high beams cutting through the growing darkness, reflecting off the asphalt in a way that made it impossible to ignore. When I reached the intersection and turned right, I expected the truck to stay on the main road, but instead, it swung through the gas station on the corner and stopped directly in front of us, blocking the way. My stomach dropped. My friend and I were suddenly aware that there was no one else around. The traffic that had been moving freely just a minute ago seemed to vanish. The sidewalks were empty, the gas station quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights, and the street ahead was still. The truck door opened, and a man stepped out. He was massive, broad-shouldered, and moved in a way that made every instinct in my body scream that we should leave. He walked toward us without hesitation. I rolled down my window, my hands shaking even though I tried to keep my grip firm on the wheel. The man leaned slightly toward the car and stared at us. The headlights of his truck glinted off his face, but I could make out the faintest trace of a smile as he studied us. There was a moment, an endless, horrifying moment, where I was completely aware of how exposed we were. The road, the intersection, the gas station, the house we had just been near, It all felt like it had been stripped of any protection or safety. He asked what we were doing near the house. I lied immediately, saying we were making a U-turn, hoping my voice didn't tremble. My friend was pale, gripping the seat tightly, and I could see him trying not to breathe too loudly. The man didn't speak again. He just stared, tilted his head slightly, and for a few seconds, I could only think about how quickly this could go wrong, how easy it would be for us to be stuck here with no one around. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he nodded, gave that faint smile again, and moved back to his truck. He got in, turned the engine over, and drove away. We didn't move for several seconds. I watched the road where he had disappeared, feeling the echo of adrenaline slowly fade, leaving a heavy, numbing awareness of what had almost happened. Finally, I shifted the car into gear and pulled forward, my hands still trembling, my friend too quiet to speak. The rest of the drive to the movie felt unreal. Every shadow along the street seemed like it could hide someone watching, and every passing car felt like it might be the same truck returning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the house, the empty property, and the man in the truck stayed in my mind. I kept thinking about how we had only been there for 10 seconds, how quickly everything escalated, and how close it could have gotten. I realized later that the house had the perfect qualities for something illegal. Its size meant that whatever could be happening inside would be hidden from prying eyes, and the location, set back from the road, gave anyone approaching enough time to see them without being noticed. The empty windows, the unfinished walls, the weeds overgrown, all of it created a perfect cover. I started imagining how easy it would be for people to move things in and out without anyone noticing. I never went back, and I never told anyone else about it. My friend hasn't mentioned it either, though I think we both carry the memory differently. He remembers the immediate fear, while I think about the implications, about what might have been hidden behind those walls. I drive past that area sometimes, and the house is still there, frozen in time, unfinished and empty in the same way it was that summer evening. I keep imagining that the truck could still be parked somewhere nearby, that someone could still be watching it. Even now, I don't know what exactly was going on at that house, and I never want to. The feeling that hit me that evening, the mixture of fascination, curiosity, and pure, unfiltered fear, was enough to make me understand that some places are better left alone. The house is still unfinished, still enormous, still imposing, and I'm convinced it's being used for something that isn't supposed to be seen. Every time I pass it, I keep my eyes on the road, my foot on the gas, and I tell myself that what I saw that evening was real, and that whatever happens inside that property, I don't want to be part of it. The entire experience left me with a clear understanding of caution. The thrill of abandoned houses, the desire to explore, the excitement of being young and untouchable, all of it faded in an instant that evening when a single man in a truck reminded me how small and unprotected you are when curiosity takes you into the wrong place. It's a lesson I carry with me every time I drive past something that feels too quiet, too hidden, or too perfect. I'll never forget that night, the smell of the summer air, the crunch of gravel under the tires, and the silent streets where a man could step out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly, leaving only a memory of fear that never quite fades. When I was 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over, which meant the house was full of energy and noise. There were about 10 of us in total, sprawled across the living room with blankets, pillows, and half-eaten snacks, watching a string of movies back to back. The adults were out at a dinner, leaving the house entirely to us, and that kind of freedom always made things feel slightly different, like we could do anything without anyone watching. The light from the television flickered across the walls, and every time a movie scene got loud or intense, we'd jump or yell, laughing at each other's reactions. It was normal chaos for a group of 10 kids in a big, empty house with doors closed and no adult oversight. Suddenly it happened. The house shook violently, enough to make all of us freeze where we sat. The vibration ran through the floor and walls like a low, solid pulse, something heavier than any earthquake I had ever felt or could imagine at that age. At the same time, a large, blinding flash lit up the backyard through the sliding glass doors. It was so bright that it burned across my vision for a moment, leaving my eyes stinging. It wasn't just light, it had heat to it, a sudden sharpness that seemed to push at the air around us. Every single one of us screamed or yelled without even thinking, the kind of raw, panicked noise that comes from pure fear. We all bolted toward the hallway as a pack, bodies shoving past each other in our rush to get to something that felt safer than the open living room. My heart was hammering so fast I could feel it in my throat. I glanced behind me for just a second and saw the couch cushions scattered across the floor, some knocked over in the chaos, and then the sliding glass doors, black now except for a faint glow that lingered where the flash had been. We stopped in the hallway, pressed together, breathing hard, the house around us settling back into an unnatural quiet that made the sudden past violence feel almost unreal. The eldest cousins in the group, two of them just barely 16, started debating what to do. The word police came up first, but the idea of calling the adults seemed safer, more reasonable. After a few minutes of nervously huddling in the hallway, they pulled out their phones and called our parents. The conversation seemed to stretch forever, and the rest of us kept glancing toward the living room, hearing only the faint hum of the television still running in the background. We didn't want to move, but the curiosity and the need to see for ourselves started to push through our fear. Eventually, we decided to venture back into the living room. Each of us grabbed whatever we could think of as a weapon. A baseball bat leaned against the wall, a broom, a flashlight, anything that could make us feel like we had some control over the situation. The air smelled of popcorn and dust disturbed by our panicked movements. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and every little sound seemed amplified in the tense silence. We edged toward the sliding doors, eyes wide, scanning the backyard. Everything was still there, trees, grass, the small shed in the corner, but it all looked untouched in a way that made it feel more alien than the flash itself. We couldn't see anything unusual, no broken branches, no scorch marks, no debris that could explain the vibration. The whole scene made no sense. Every shadow looked too deep, every reflection on the glass too sharp. We stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only half an hour, checking every corner of the living room and backyard. Nothing moved. The television played on, some part of a movie with muffled voices and bright colors, completely oblivious to what had just happened. The tension in the room didn't dissipate completely, not even a little. Every small noise, a cough, a footstep on the wooden floor, a gust of wind brushing against the glass, made all of us flinch. When the parents returned, it was almost anticlimactic. They opened the door, laughing at the noise, assuming we had just gotten worked up over some minor thing, maybe a car backfiring or a neighbor's firework. They couldn't see what we had felt, couldn't understand the weight of it, and we didn't argue. There was nothing to show them, nothing we could point to and say had been real except our pounding hearts and shaking hands. The adults went inside, chatting casually about their evening, while we still stood in the living room, unsure whether to breathe or to run again. Over the years, the event became a kind of quiet obsession for us, a story repeated with increasing attention to detail every time we saw each other. We have tried to rationalize it, imagining scenarios ranging from a fallen tree in the far corner of the property to a transformer blowing out somewhere in the neighborhood. Neighbors claimed they had seen and heard nothing. The police never reported anything unusual. Still, there was that flash, that forceful tremor through the house that none of us could forget. We learned to notice the subtle things that could indicate danger, paying attention to small sounds or light shifts that would have gone unnoticed before. It has changed how I perceive silence in a house or the calmness of a backyard at night. What scared us the most wasn't just the flash or the shaking. It was the total absence of explanation afterward. Knowing something powerful had occurred right behind the glass, and yet finding nothing, made the experience visceral and terrifying. Even 10 years later, we bring it up occasionally, usually when a storm passes, or when someone mentions something falling or flashing unexpectedly. There's still that moment of silent recollection, remembering the feeling of the floor beneath us vibrating in a way that should not have been possible, the whiteness of the flash pressing against our eyes, and the sound of our own panicked breathing echoing in the hall. It remains the clearest memory of fear I have ever experienced, raw and undiluted, a perfect example of a moment that can't be explained but cannot be forgotten. The scariest part of all of it was that it happened in a place we considered completely safe, a home we thought we knew every corner of, every sound and shadow. It wasn't darkness that frightened us or strangers outside. It was the sudden, inexplicable intrusion of something powerful and unknowable into that safety. A sharp reminder that the world could shift beneath you in an instant, without warning and without reason. We have tried to dissect it logically, tried to assign a cause to the sensation, but nothing fits perfectly. Nothing ever will. In the end, the backyard remained just a backyard, and the house continued to stand exactly as it had before, unchanged and indifferent. We returned to our movies that night, eventually calming down as the adrenaline faded, but none of us ever truly forgot what we felt. 10 years later, the story still lives with us, not as a myth or a legend, but as a real memory of a moment when the ordinary world suddenly revealed its potential for something completely extraordinary and terrifying, leaving a mark that time has not erased.